More than 3,000 advisories were issued to those who did not observe the elevated safe distancing measures, despite repeated warnings from the government to stay home. In a Facebook post earlier, Environment and Water Resources Minister Masagos Zulkifli announced that starting today, those caught gathering in public will have their particulars taken down. A stern written warning will also be issued to first-time offenders. Repeated offenders will be fined $300 or will be charged in court. Meanwhile, with all schools and most workplaces shut, many Singaporeans have visited parks to get their exercise in or respite amid the current situation. Authorities continue to enforce safe distancing measures at the parks. At Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, for example, multiple signs urging people to keep a 1 meter distance from those around them are placed throughout the trail leading up to the summit. MParks officers are seen making rounds to remind people not to gather and to keep a safe distance. Joining us to talk about safe distancing measures at parks is Science and Environment correspondent Audrey Tan. Hi, Audrey. Now, Audrey, you were at Bukit Timah Nature Reserve earlier today. How are MParks officers enforcing safe distancing measures besides giving verbal warnings?
Yeah, so once we got to Bukit Timah in the morning, we hiked up from the base of the hill to the summit, and along the trail on the way up, there were a lot of signs reminding people to keep at least 1 meter from the people around them. And on top of that, once we got to the top of the hill, we actually saw NParks officers deploying drones at the summit. So NParks later told us that that was used for crowd monitoring, and they'll be deploying about 30 drones at those parks that are bigger around Singapore, including East Coast Park, Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. And the data from the drones will be fed into a safe distancing map that NParks has developed, which will kind of give people an indication of how crowded a certain park or nature reserve is before people go down. So yeah, there seems to be a lot of safety measures in place. We also saw the pavilion that people used to gather at the top of the summit. It was fenced off, similar to this playground here behind me. I'm now at Pasir Ris Park. And the reason why all these areas are being cordoned off is so that because the government is encouraging people not to loiter in certain places and to just go home immediately after they get their exercise.
Yeah. Now, Audrey, I just want to pick up on the point where you mentioned with regard to the website, right? People are advised to check the Safe Distancing at Parks website before heading over to avoid any overcrowding. In the event, say, the nearest park has high visitorship and the next nearest one is a drive away, are we still allowed to go to the further one?
Okay, so in NParks response, they did say that the purpose of the map is so that people can choose the park closest to them, which makes sense because people are encouraged not to leave their homes except for very essential things. So I guess that the point is, if you see the park nearest to you, if it's very full, you can always go back to the park for exercise when it is less crowded and just try to minimize the amount of time you spend outdoors. So NParks also said that once you finish your exercise, which you are only supposed to do as an individual or with your immediate family unit, you should just go home immediately and you shouldn't loiter or hang around. In fact, this morning when we were at Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, we did saw NParks officers going to people who were resting to remind them not to linger and not to loiter and not to hang around, but to just immediately go home after they finish exercise.
Right. Now, Audrey, then is there a time limit as to how long one can spend at the parks?
I guess the time limit depends on how long your exercise routine is. NParks did say that you should just go home immediately after you finish your workout. So I don't think that they have mandated any specific time frames for how long you can spend outdoors. But yeah, the rule of thumb is just try to minimize the amount of time you spend outside your house.
Right. Now, Audrey, besides avoiding crowds and maintaining a safe distance from other park users, what else can one do to ensure their safety while getting their exercise in?
So just remember to stay 1 meter away from the people around you. Don't linger, I guess. Try your best to just go home after you finish your exercise. And I think these are just some of the safety precautions that I've mentioned earlier already. And yeah, that's what people should do.
Well, thank you so much, Audrey, for taking the time to speak with us. We've been speaking to Audrey Tan, our Science and Environment correspondent, who is actually at Pasir Ris Park on the safe distancing measures that is being enforced at parks amid the current circuit breaker measures to curb the spread of COVID-19.